Hello, class. I sound so professional. Hello, class. I was asked by a student or two to go ahead and review chapter 6 since it has been a couple of weeks and I know we did it in class, but um, since your quiz this week is on chapters 6 and 7, um, why not give you chapter 6 in review? So this is surveys and observations describing what people do. Now, I'm probably not going to go into as much detail as I did when I actually lectured it in class for obvious reasons. We want to use our time constructively and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So um, we talked about giving examples of how question wording can change results or a survey or a poll, describing different ways that questions can be worded, explaining how to increase construct validity by wording them carefully and avoiding things like leading questions, double-barreled and double negatives. Explain how the question order can change meaning and even validity of a question. I also explained ways to increase construct validity by preventing what we call respondent shortcuts. Yay saying, trying to look good, or sometimes trying to look bad, and simple inability to report, especially if it's more than you can possibly know. I also described how observational techniques are different from the different survey techniques, and I explained ways to improve construct validity by reducing things like observer bias, observer effects, and target reactivity. So I will go over this again fairly briefly so that we can get reacquainted with it, and so you have that review for you before you go and do the quiz. So construct validity of survey and polls, and then observations, behavioral observations. When we're looking at wording, we want to make sure that we are being straightforward, that we're asking questions in a very easy to understand manner, because if you really want good construct validity, you need to know that you're measuring what you're intending to measure, and you need to know that it's obvious enough and easy enough that people taking the surveys can understand the questions and would want to answer the questions truthfully. Otherwise, it ruins the integrity of your questionnaire, survey, experiment, what have you. So you want to write well-worded questions. You want to make sure that they're questions, you don't have too many or too little, and you want to ensure that it's the best experience for researcher and participant all together. So here we see there are different formats. We have forced choice, which is a yes, no, A or B only. We have a Likert type scale where you have this University of Delaware graphic of well-being or happiness on a scale of 1 to 7, from strongly disagree to strongly agree. Or we have what's called a semantic differential, where you give a review or you give a rating like 1 to 5 stars, and semantic differential means that you usually give a reason why. So if you gave this Uber driver, if you gave this restaurant 5 stars, what was the reasoning for that? Good service, good food, all of that stuff. Good chit chat, or maybe there was water in the Uber that you could drink, good music that the driver was playing, something like that. So you'll give the rating and you give your reasoning behind the rating on certain ones, like a Yelp review. So we have the formats of, as I was just going over, open-ended questions, which is what we call qualitative, and we're dealing with quantitative in this class. Qualitative says, what do you think of this class? In that case, you can answer it however your heart desires, or your brain in this case, right? Forced choice, again, is just giving you 2 choices, and you have to choose one of them. Do you like this class so far? Yes or no? Easy or hard? Blah, 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 blah. Only 2 choices in a forced choice, so you can only go with one or the other. Likert scale is probably the most common. How difficult is this class on a scale of easy to hard, or 1 to 5? Likert scale. Some people call it Likert, like I said, but I don't, because I like Likert. Likert. Okay, that's enough of that. So on a scale of 1 to 4, 1 to 5, 1 to 7, how likely you are to find somebody guilty of blah, blah, blah. how easy or hard this class is, how much you strongly agree or disagree with a statement. And there's your semantic differential, which tells you to rate and review and give a reason why. So semantics meaning the context of why you gave it what you gave it. When we are looking at writing well-worded questions, we want to avoid the pitfalls. One is we are not lawyers on the witness stand, and we are not trying to get people to admit or to credit or discredit them. So in this case, you don't want to use questions that are leading them towards an answer that you may want or you may not want. So rather than asking the question, do you agree it's a terrible idea to legalize marijuana, which leads them to think that they should be saying it's a terrible idea, or even if they weren't going to say that, it may put that in their head. These types of leading questions lead people to answer it in the way that the wording makes it sound. Or it may at least change the answer from what they would have said. So in order to avoid these problems or pitfalls, you want to be as straightforward as possible, because asking, do you agree it's a terrible idea to legalize marijuana, is a leading question. So how would we fix this? Like we talked about in class, we just say, do you agree that marijuana should be legalized? In this case, it becomes a forced choice. Yes, no, yes, but. And this could be an open-ended question as well. So you could give a yes, but, no, but, or maybe type of answer as well. But either way, it's a very straightforward answer. And if you're not leading the person, it should make it easier for them to answer the question. You also want to avoid double-barreled questions. Sometimes we talk about the length of a survey or questionnaire might be too long for people to want to take if they're giving you their precious time. So if it's 50, 100 questions long, they'd probably be like, yeah, I don't think so, even if they're getting compensated for it. So sometimes you might want to shorten it up, and it might be tempting to give them more than one question at a time using the same question. So a double-barreled question would be more than one question in a single question, I guess, in a single statement or question. Do you enjoy long walks and taking exams? The problem with this is, of course, if you say yes, you're saying yes to both. If you say no, you're saying no to both. Even when it comes to things like who wants cake and ice cream at a birthday party, some people like cake and not ice cream. Some people like ice cream and not cake. And if you're saying yes, you're saying yes to both. So why would you do this? The easy way to avoid this, of course, is either eliminate half of that if you're worried about the number of questions in your survey, or simply just ask it as two different questions. Do you enjoy long walks? Do you enjoy taking exams? I understand the need for brevity or keeping it, as short as possible, but these types of double-barreled questions can really get a person in trouble, or do not get at the integrity of the question, because if people are forced to say yes to more than one thing, that's all you can go on, so. Negative wording is also a really bad way to do this. It confuses people and it's unnecessary. Look at this following statement. People who do not drive with a suspended license, so that means people who are driving legally with a good license, should never be punished. We could make that into a much more direct statement. And what the heck is it saying? People who do not drive with a suspended license should never be punished. I had to parse that out, right? I had to transpose it in my head. You should never have participants trying to do that, because it takes away from, again, the integrity of the survey, and it causes frustration, and people may be less likely to finish it if their questions are super convoluted. We also talk about question order. Things like if there's personal and sensitive information and you leave it at the beginning, it may be a feeling that stuff is too personal. You want related questions to be fairly in the same area, unless the whole thing is based on one topic. And so if you do have sort of personal questions, if you leave them towards the end, at that point, somebody who's already taken the rest of it says, oh, okay, well, if this is the last questions, I can do that. But if you give them sort of really personal type questions at the beginning, they may be like, look, if the whole survey is going to be like this, maybe I just won't answer it, because you never know what's too sensitive or too personal for some people when they're taking the survey. But if you leave it towards the end of the survey, they're much more likely to answer it. Yeah. So what about encouraging accurate responses? One of the biggest drawbacks of these surveys and questionnaires, although they're fairly easy and you can recruit people and all of that, is that people may not really still want to take it, even if they're getting compensated. So they may use shortcuts, and they may not give accurate responses because maybe they think that personal information of theirs is going back to whoever is reading these surveys and all of that stuff. So first thing is wanting to make sure that they're giving efficient responses and meaningful responses, and that they're not using these shortcuts. So we want to ensure that they are telling the truth and remind them that none of these answers are connected to them. Their names are never used, that it's all confidential and anonymous. And so even though we know what was said, we would never be able to trace it back to who said it, nor do we want to. So that's one of obviously the biggest things. Using shortcuts. Sometimes we see in these response sets that they get to use, we see these responses that are all good. If you have a scale of 1 to 10, and like I said, on a evaluation of me, I don't mind if you do this, but for the integrity of other types of questionnaires and surveys, it's probably not the best idea, called yay saying, where everybody's just giving the highest score and getting out of there, maybe with a $5 gift card or something. Or they may be super indecisive, so they may fence sit and just do all maybes, which doesn't really do you any good either. Some people are answering questions in a way to try to make themselves look good, even though, again, we don't know, we can't match somebody's answers to their personal information. And sometimes, like I talked about in class with my brother, they try to look bad. Also, people try to report more than they can possibly know when it comes to memories and things like that. And all that does is make them look bad because they can't possibly know that stuff. So like reporting memories of events, most of the time our memories are not able to pick up every little detail. They kind of just get the gist. So if people are starting to give more details than they can, this gets into this idea of being dishonest and not being a meaningful response. So here we see, looking at this University of Delaware survey, we have, in most ways, my life is close to my ideal. Conditions of my life are excellent. I am satisfied with my life. So far, I've gotten the important things I want in life. If I could live my life over, I would change almost nothing. So if somebody is really happy and they seem to be very outgoing, they might actually answer it this way. I'm pretty happy with where I am in life. Maybe not the current situations at the exact moment, but overall. But the problem is we don't know if it's somebody that's just super happy in life that would really respond this way, or if people are using a shortcut and just hitting strongly agree or clicking on strongly agree for every single question. And that could be a problem, because what do you trust? Do you trust that they're super, super happy, which most majority of people are not? Or are they using a shortcut? Well, again, the way to do this is to reverse the order of one of the questions by adding maybe a negative word. Now, we're not talking about negative wording that confuses people, right? So if we were to just take the third statement here, I am satisfied with my life, and all we have to do is add a not in front of satisfied and make that question negative. So to strongly disagree would be still responding in the same way as the others that are strongly agree, because we made it a negative statement. And this way, we can tell if people are really paying attention and they're really doing it correctly, and one of them requires the opposite answer. Right in the middle if people are paying attention and not yay saying, they will follow those directions. And if they are yay saying, then it makes it inconsistent, and at least we know that they're trying to use a shortcut. So in this case, we would keep, in most ways, my life is close to my ideal, conditions of my life are excellent. And then in the third one, we would put, I am not satisfied with my life. Because again, if they are paying attention, it would be strongly agree. And then this one, since it's negatively worded, the answer would be strongly disagree if they were as happy as possible. And that way you only have 4 of the 5 for strongly agree. And if they're actually paying attention, number 3 will be scored as strongly disagree. And that's how you fix that. If we were going back, if we were fence sitting, what we would see is that down the middle where it says neither agree nor disagree is where people are. Am I happy? No. Am I unhappy? Not really. I'm just kind of in the middle. Well, fence sitting doesn't really give us anything. Even if it's slightly agree or slightly disagree, at least we have something to work with. But if everybody is going to take another shortcut and they're not really sure how happy they are or how committed they are or blah, 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 they may do this. The easiest way to take away the ability to fence sit is take away the neither category. You can make it a 1 to 6 scale, and that way it forces them to have to go slightly disagree or slightly agree. Because it's slightly, whatever their gut tells them, it helps you to form a curve or a average from these scores on one side of the fence or the other, and they cannot sit on the fence if you take away that option. Make them make a decision one way or the other, even if it's slight. So we talk about people trying to look good. We know even when we did the Stroop task, people knew they were being timed. People knew there were other students that were taking the doing the experiment, and so some of them tried to go as fast as they could, which is why we use the idea of self-correcting, because when you try to go too fast, sometimes you make mistakes. So sometimes people will report the way that they think makes them look good, or if they know what the point of the experiment or survey is, they may try to answer in a way that makes you look good. Either way, it's what they believe is socially desirable responding. And again, one of the things that we want to encourage is not that, although you'd love your hypotheses to be met and you'd love them to be correct, you want to make sure that the integrity of the survey is people being truthful. So a lot of times they'll fake good, sometimes they'll fake bad to pretend like they don't know as much as they do. In class, I told you guys that my brother does that, where he will slightly get the name wrong of some famous person that we saw in a movie. And he's like, that's right, isn't it? And he just wants to get a rise or a response out of me. So he will fake bad as opposed to faking good to make it look like he's an idiot and get a reaction from me. And I just kind of roll my eyes now and don't say anything because I know he knows the real person's name, but he's looking for that rise out of me. So people do that in real life, and they may even do that on a survey. So, if I fake bad, for whatever reason, they can't get back to me, or maybe they'll never ask me to do this again. Well, guess what, sir or ma'am? It is anonymous. Also, people a lot of times try to self-report more than they can know. So there's a picture here on the right of a lady picking out yogurt. And if she were asked by a market researcher, why did you pick this specific yogurt? Sometimes people try to come up with an explanation because, again, it's kind of like faking good. They want to make it seem like they know more than they can possibly know. Oh, well, I am very conscientious of the ingredients and the, amount of fat or sugars or blah, 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 carbs in here. Or, there's a whole story that when I was a kid, grandma used to make. No, sometimes people just like the taste. And it's as simple as that. We don't need all of that information, and it shouldn't really be required. So this also goes back to possibly asking in the survey itself. Try to be straightforward, make it brief, and don't try to get people to come up with answers that they couldn't possibly know because they're probably false. And that also ruins the integrity of what we're trying to do. when asking people to report on memories of events, unless it was a flashbulb memory, which really evoked an emotional response, like where were you on 9/11? Where were you when Trump got elected, et cetera, et cetera? Where were you when you found out about the pandemic, as our new memories? That people can't possibly remember a lot of things. What we know about the fallacy of memory is that it is not as rock solid as people like to think. And again, if you listen to my lecture on the sample seed article, you would know this. There's a plug for it. So if you're doing this in reverse order, feel free, because this chapter was a couple weeks ago. So behavioral observations is the next part. We talk about all things being equal, that self-report, people can be dishonest and you don't necessarily know. That sometimes it's volunteer-based, so only the people that want to answer it that have a stake in it, which doesn't give us a nice, necessarily random sample. So all things being considered, behavioral observations are more objective. People are watching them, coding them, either in person or on video, and it just seems to be more reliable data. That doesn't mean that we can't conduct things using surveys, because that's a lot of how we operate in the real world. But like I said, all things being equal, behavioral observations are much better than self-reports, which is why when we are in class, we would do experiments with the rest of the class where we can behaviorally observe. So we'll talk about examples of claims that were based on observational data. And again, point out that observations can be better than self-reports, because observations can be reliable and valid. We can ensure those same things that we ensured at the beginning of this chapter, that we're not asking questions that are too convoluted or double negatives or things like that. And in this way, people also can't respond in those ways that they can on paper. Yay saying, fence sitting, all of those things. We'll also talk about some of the pitfalls to avoid, like observer bias, observer effects, and if you are observing a group of people or just individual people, that they are not going to act different simply because you're there, and how we can sort of mitigate those things. So looking at behavioral observations, just like with surveys, we can make sure that we have good reliability and validity. We should still be consistent in what we do, and we should still be able to measure what it is we're intending to measure. So observational research is better because we're not relying on somebody's memory or, them potentially lying in a self-report. We are actually observing what they do, observing their responses, and being able to record them, whether in person or coding from a video. So when we talk about claims that are based on observational data, sometimes people are just thinking about their own personal opinions of things that they've noticed or trends in society, and it's not always based on actual data, and may need to be collected. So if you were to ask people in general, they would say that women have the generalization of having more vocabulary, higher vocabulary, using more words per day, communicating better than men. That is the general perception, and we hear this all the time. Is it based on stereotype? Is it based on real evidence? Well, we don't really know. So we could conduct a study, and in table 1 down below, we see that this is the estimated number of words spoken per day for female and male study participants across 6 samples between 98 and 2004. And what we see is that women have slightly higher vocabularies, or use slightly more words per day in this case, but not enough for it to be statistically significant. So based on the actual data, it refutes this idea that women talk significantly more than men, because what the actual data says is that there's really no difference. For men using their hands or more spatial skills or things like that, what we find is pretty much the same thing, right? So this can help us to understand how much people talk, and is there really a difference between men and women? And the answer, like most gender studies, is yes, but not statistically significant and not enough for you to make that claim. Observing hockey moms and dads. We talked about this in class where there were complaints that, people only focus on the negative comments that parents make, and they don't really listen to or really are even aware of the positive things, or maybe nothing being said, because the only thing that really stands out when observing hockey moms and dads in Canada is when they make a fuss and yell at the other children, yell at the coaches, yell at the refs. So it can make it seem like all that happens a lot more often. But when this was actually studied in Canada, they only found about 4% of parents were actually engaging in this type of thing. And it just, remember when we talked about with the availability heuristic and the present bias, we only focus on the times where parents were rude and yelled at one another, or the coaches' children, or either their own kid or somebody else's, or of course the refs. But really, it doesn't happen all that often when you actually go ahead and test that. Looking at families in the evening, we talked about observing families' dinner time talk, and that could just be a recorded video conversation, and how much each parents or children talked about their appreciation for the food, how yucky or gross the food was, which you can see is much more children than parents. The rewarding aspects of the food is parents, and children basically not saying anything. Negotiating, you're going to see parents negotiating, but children negotiating almost as much, counter negotiating. Well, if I eat my vegetables, do I get dessert, and blah, blah, blah. The health of the food, of course, you're going to see parents completely a lot more talking about it, children not really caring or saying anything. And how good or yummy the food is actually is more children than adults, which is expected. But you can actually document these things by observing and coding, rather than just asking people's opinion. And a lot of times children don't really want to take surveys anyway. So in that, you'd miss that, target demographic. And in that case, that wouldn't be good. So when you're observing and the children are talking, you can gather their data rather than have to worry about them filling out a survey or being truthful or things like that. Observations can also be better than self-reports because we are making more reliable and valid observations. We're making sure that inter-rater reliability, if we're coding, is there, internal reliability, that the questions we're asking have to do with it, and any test retest should be similar in these cases. The one thing you have to worry about that you don't in a self-report is these biases, whether they're intended or unintended, and I would hope they'd never be intended. Observer bias is when the observers see what they expect to see, and I gave you guys the example of the maze bright and maze dull rats. That research assistants in a lab were given sorry, my dog was distracting me. These lab assistants or researchers were given a box of rats and said that these rats were the smartest of the smart ones in the batch, really good at doing things. So they put in an idea and an expectation in the research assistants or students' heads that these were the really good rats at running mazes. The next batch was given to the other group, the other half of students, and said that they were maze dull rats. These were the dumb ones. These were the ones that we don't expect to do so well. So when you put an expectation, it biases a lot of times those people running the experiment. So guess what? As I already told you guys, the maze bright rats were reported as faster getting through the maze. The maze dull rats were reported as slower overall, on average, getting through the maze. And there was no difference between these mice. They were all rats. They were all rats from the same litter and things like that. So there should have been no real difference between them, except for the idea that was implanted in the research assistants, students' heads. So we may bias things and not even realize we're doing that. I showed you guys the video of von Osten and his amazing clever Hans. And what we saw was that the horse was not able to do math. The horse was just really smart and able to pick up small clues from von Osten himself. When he knew the answer, he would, move a part of his face to get the horse to start, and then he would raise his eyebrow when the horse was reaching the number. And so when the horse noticed von Osten raising or arching his eyebrow, what he did was it caused the horse to stop, because that was von Osten's unintended sign to stop counting, or stop making, hitting his hoof on the floor, on the ground. So that's observer bias. A lot of times as observers, we want our hypotheses to be correct. And so it may bias the way that we interpret data, or we may give away subtle little clues. I think I told you guys if we were to do a report on, why am I blanking here? I'm sorry, on a new drug, a new antidepressant, and I were to give you guys either the regular pill with the drug in it, with the medication in it, or I were to give you a placebo pill, which looks like it, smells like it, tastes like it, but just doesn't contain any of the actual medication, I could accidentally bias it by saying, to anyone that's got the placebo, I'm like, here you go, here you go. But anybody that doesn't have it, I can be like, here's your pill. Hey, here it is. Take it. You want it, right? That is a way to, that would bias it. And that would be observer bias. Observer effects are when the participants basically confirm expectations. And that really follows, from the example that I gave, because if you knew which group you're in, if that you got the actual drug or if you got the placebo, then you may change the way that you answer, that you act. So you may confirm my expectations. If you know that I'm testing a new drug and I really want that drug to work, and you knew you got the drug, you may answer by saying you feel less depressed. And so that's where observer bias leads to observer effects, because if the researcher or research assistant knows who's in what groups and the participants know which group they're in, they may answer differently than if they didn't know. So the way we sort of mitigate this is kind of like with von Osten. What they found is if he didn't know the answer himself, it wouldn't bias, the horse wouldn't get the answer right most of the time. So we run what's called a double-blind study, and that way we usually get a research assistant that has no idea who's in what group, and that way the participants don't know which group they're in either. And reactivity is when the participants react to being watched. If you're at work, which is not many of us these days, if you're at work and you're doing something and your boss or a coworker comes by, and maybe you're doing something that's not necessarily kosher or something that you're not supposed to be doing at work, you're going to change the way that you act. Or if you know that your boss is coming in to see you, you may act a little bit differently than you would under normal circumstances. So when participants react because they know they're being watched and they act differently than they normally would, that could compromise your study as well. So again, observer effects are when participants confirm the expectations. So we talked about the bright and dull rats, and we talked about clever Hans. Here we talk about a masked research design, where a lot of times maybe the participant, I don't like to say is tricked or misdirected, but in this way they can't guess what the answers are going to be because they don't really know exactly what's going on. One of my favorite types of mask design much food the people take, and whether or not they watched a commercial in the middle that had to do with food or like a car. So those are pretty cool because even the students in the fellow students in their research methods class did not know what it was that they were actually measuring. And it was the last one of the day. It was the last experiment of the day. So they, were able to just take whatever they wanted and leave. It's not like they were going to take it and go sit back down in their seats. So that's what we would call a mask design. Here, what we can see is the way that they coded parents interacting at the hockey games. Remember that example from a few minutes ago. Positive general comments, positive in tone, directed at the team in general. Go Crusaders, nice try, good work. Positive specific, nice play, JD, way to go, LJ. Directed at a specific player or maybe coach. Corrective or instructional, defined as including a specific action that the player was instructed to do. Go after it, get back, you've got to cover him, be careful, watch out, blah, blah, blah. Negative comments would be usually directed towards the referee. Much of the time, negativity is due to a sarcastic tone. What kind of call is that? Come on, ref, you call that a penalty? Why don't you open your eyes or get some glasses, right? And then there were just neutral ones. Did you book your hotel room? These are just, banter and side conversations that parents may be having with one another at some point during the game or during timeouts or in between periods. So each remark was coded for intensity based on a 3-point scale. 1 is relatively quiet, little to no emotion. 2 is louder and more intense, stronger emotion, but still pretty controlled. 3 is kind of out of control, right? Loud, intense, extreme emotional. With reactivity, again, when participants are reacting to being watched, there are 3 solutions that the book suggests. 1 is to blend in. Don't stick out like a sore thumb. If you do that, they may realize that you're not there. If you kind of blend into the crowd so they don't even notice you're there, or they have no idea if you're there for them, then they may not alter their behavior. So we call those unobtrusive observations. A lot of the time, you just wait a week or two because once they get used to you, then you're not something that they're reacting to, right? So if it's school class, kindergarten class, preschool class, maybe just hang out with the preschoolers for a week. You're there to volunteer or helping out. Maybe you're a new person temporarily. And then by the end of a week or two, they're used to you being there, so it's not going to alter their behavior. If you start writing stuff down, they're not going to flinch and they're not going to act differently because now they're used to you being there. Or the third one would be to measure the results from farther away, meaning using a two-way mirror, as you can see in the picture, or being able to, with the proper permission, record the behavior so that you can watch it later. And that's where, of course, you may have multiple coders, and that's where inter-rater reliability would come in handy. So what about observing people ethically? What is the question that's being asked? Is it ethical for researchers to observe the behavior of others? Well, we would like to know what's going on with people, but also we can't violate their privacy and things like that. So the answer really is it depends. If we get parental permission for children under 18, if we have some sort of agreement with work or wherever we're observing them, that people can do this, if we get people to sign consent forms that we're able to do this, as opposed to them, even when they take surveys, they have to have consent forms. So we would like to do things as ethically as possible. Is everything that we do or everything that we hypothesize or all of the research that we want to do ethically possible? Not necessarily. So we have to be careful in those regards, right? Participant safety is of the utmost importance in this case. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for listening to Chapter 6 again. Hopefully it provided a good review for you guys before your quiz and before the exam. And I should have Chapter 8 up fairly soon. All right. So we will talk soon. Later.